Hello, my little friends. Rivers here. I want to tell you a funny story about my father. Now, based on the ways that I have talked about my dad, you'd think that he's the most perfect person that ever walked the earth. And let me tell you, he was darn near perfect as a father. He was a wonderful husband, treated my mom like $1,000,000, and he was so kind to all of us. People loved working with him, and he was just the best. But he had a couple of faults, and he had kind of a bad temper. And I so admire the fact that he never gave in to his bad temper. He never hit any of us. He never screamed at us. He was so gentle and kind. He was an amazing man. But he, as they say, has feet of clay, which means that he wasn't perfect. And let me tell you one story. It's a pretty funny story. So I was probably about 7 or 8 years old. My dad was a pretty good little athlete. He played basketball and football at South High School, and he was a great tennis player, and he loved to play golf. I never understood that. Golf is not my thing, but he was a really good tennis player. And back in the day, when I was young, back in the 60s, especially early 60s, mid 60s, church basketball was a big deal. In fact, they even had what they called all-church basketball tournaments that were held up at Einar Nielsen Fieldhouse, and they'd have teams come from all over the country, ward teams that would play in a championship, and they would have them on TV. Anyway, with that as a backdrop, my dad, in our ward where we lived at 1503 Lone Peak Drive, and by the way, if any of my grandkids yell out 1503 Lone Peak Drive, there might be a little bit of money in it for you. Okay, so keep listening. Okay, so anyway, it was like a Tuesday or a Wednesday night, and each ward had its own basketball team. Now, on my ward's basketball team was the Hall of Fame football player Steve Young's dad, Grit Young, and my dad and Grit were really good friends. And Grit was like one of the most physically intimidating people I've ever met in my entire life. And my dad was very competitive. And so I wanted to go see my dad play basketball. And he was a good basketball player, and they had a really good team. So we went to the Stake Center, and I'm sitting on top of the stage in those cold metal chairs. And I'm watching this game unfold, and there was a player for the opposite team who was breaking away for a layup. Well, my father, being a pretty competitive guy, wasn't going to let him have a layup, so he ran up from behind and kind of put his arms around the guy. Now, he didn't throw him to the ground or anything, but he purposely fouled him before he could make a layup, which is, he's just being aggressive and being competitive. And the guy who he threw his arms around was outraged by what my dad did. And he turned around and he swung this wild swing to hit my father. And I'm watching all of this from the stage. I'm a little 7 or 8 year old boy in my husky Levi's and my shaved head. And I'm thinking, what the heck? Somebody's going to take a punch at my dad. And so what happened was the guy took a wild swing at my dad. My dad ducked, and then he ran into him and drove him down on the ground and was going like this. He was beating on him, and he had to have his teammates tear him apart from this guy. The opposing player was screaming obscenities at him, and I'm sitting there up on the stage on the cold metal chairs, and I'm going, what the heck? My dad taught me that I was supposed to be a good sportsman, and what is he doing? And then I will tell you that I'm not quite as dumb as I look. I thought to myself, my dad is cleaning this guy's clock. And I thought, note to self, don't make my dad angry at me. He can handle himself really well. So I put that away in my fertile little primary boy brain. And so they pulled him together, and the other team was holding this guy back, and he says, "You want a piece of me? Want a piece of me? Let's go finish this out in the parking lot." And my dad, I still remember him doing this. He says, "Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, let's go out in the parking lot." Now, I don't know how it happened, but we somehow managed. I followed my dad with my eyes just as big as saucers out to the car, and I I had seen a new Lewis Arwell Harris that I had never seen before, and I was trying to process everything. So we got in the car, and may I tell you that it was the quietest ride home I have ever been in with my dad. There was no commentary. And because I had seen how my dad had handled himself, do you think I was going to say, "Hey, Dad, you lost your temper. What's the matter with you? You taught me to be a good sport. What's going on here?" No, I'm a little bit brighter than I look. And it was a cold, quiet ride home. And I have to admit that I was kind of proud of my dad, in fact, really proud. And I now understand why in my dad's growing up years, he broke his nose 11 times. 11 times. And maybe I'll tell you the stories of how he broke his nose. And then I'd like to tell you, I'll give you a teaser. One of my favorite stories involves the number 11 and Eliza Harris ride. Are you listening to this? And I'll tell you the story of Eliza and the number 11. Stay tuned, Earthlings. More stories to come.